Pretoria, South Africa, 1970. The summer was gently fading, leaving behind golden afternoons and a light breeze that rustled the jacaranda trees. On one of those quiet days, May Cavendish stepped into the University of Pretoria once again, books tucked under her arm, eyes focused but heart slightly adrift. She was studying nutrition and already stood out, not for her looks, although her natural beauty was undeniable, but for the way she carried herself, poised, thoughtful, and full of purpose. Elon Musk was already known on campus. A bright engineering student, he came from a wealthy, traditional family, the kind that carried old money and older expectations. Errol was quiet, precise, and deeply curious about how the world worked. But despite his brilliance, he had learned to keep people at a certain distance. Until that afternoon. It happened in the library. May, distracted while scanning the shelf for a book on physiology, dropped her notebook. Errol, seated nearby, stood up almost instinctively and picked it up. "Thank you," she said softly, offering a shy smile. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. There was a pause. Nothing dramatic, no violins. Just a silence that lingered, the kind that settles when two souls recognize something they weren't looking for. In the weeks that followed, they crossed paths again and again. Study groups turned into coffee breaks into long conversations. May talked about her dream of helping people through food and health. Errol shared his fascination with engines, electricity, and the idea that everything, even chaos, could be solved with the right equation. There was something magnetic between them. Not a loud attraction, but a quiet, firm pull. A sense of companionship that grew naturally, like sunlight filling a room. But the warmth of new love soon met the chill of old traditions. When Errol told his family about May, the reaction was immediate and harsh. His father, a stern businessman known for his rigid values, dismissed her with a sentence. "A model? A nutritionist? She's not our kind of people." Errol stood in silence. But something inside him, perhaps for the first time, refused to obey. May, for her part, wasn't unaware of the whispers, nor the cold glances she received at certain events. Yet, she never questioned her worth. She had earned everything in her life through honesty and effort. If being with Errol meant swimming against the current, she would do it, but only if he swam alongside her. One evening, after walking her home, Errol stopped at the front gate. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. He looked into her eyes and said, "I want a life with you, May, even if it means giving up the one they wanted for me." She didn't answer with words. She just reached for his hand and held it tight. They decided to marry a few months later. Simple plans: a garden, close friends, no champagne fountains, no designer suits, just love, clear and true. But his father didn't budge. "If you go through with this, you're on your own," he warned. To which Errol, calm but resolute, replied, "Then maybe for the first time, I'll truly belong to myself." The ceremony took place in a modest backyard adorned with borrowed chairs and flowers picked at dawn. May wore a daisy crown in her hair and a soft dress she had altered by hand. Errol's suit was plain, but the way he looked at her made everything glow. They exchanged vows in front of the people who mattered, not many, but enough. Enough to witness a love that asked for no permission. As they walked away hand in hand, toward a life that promised neither wealth nor ease, May whispered, "This is the beginning of everything." And Errol nodded because he knew, sometimes the richest life begins with the simplest yes. If this story reminded you of a love that began quietly but meant everything, maybe you'd like to stay with us. Tap the like button if something here touched your heart, and if you'd like to hear the rest, feel warmly invited to subscribe. There's so much more ahead, and we'd love to have you with us. The sky looked unusually clear that morning, as if it knew something important was about to unfold. In a small garden behind a friend's house, chairs had been borrowed, flowers gently arranged, and a makeshift arch built with love. It was here, surrounded by soft voices and sunlit petals, that May and Errol got married. May, just 23, wore an ivory dress with lace sleeves she had carefully altered herself. Her blonde hair was loosely curled, crowned with tiny wildflowers. She didn't wear any jewelry except for a thin gold ring, a quiet promise of a loud commitment. Errol, 25, stood tall in a light gray suit and white shirt, no tie, no flair. Just sincerity. His eyes never left hers. The ceremony was small, but full of warmth. A few close friends stood as witnesses. No family from Errol's side came. His parents had made it clear. If he married Maye, he would no longer be part of their world. But neither Maye nor Errol let that shadow linger. There was too much light between them. When they held hands and spoke their vows, it was as if the earth paused for a breath. Not a single guest doubted they were watching something true. After the ceremony, they walked back to their rented home, a modest two-room house on a quiet street. The wooden floor creaked when they stepped inside. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, but it was theirs, and it was enough. A few days later, the letter arrived, an official envelope from a law firm, crisp and cold. Errol opened it in silence. He read every word slowly, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer without a sound. He had been disinherited. No money, no property, no acknowledgement. His name erased from a family's future. That evening, as dusk settled in and the house grew quiet, Maye found him sitting alone in the kitchen. She walked over and placed her hand on his. "We don't need much, Errol. Just each other. And courage." He didn't speak right away. Then, softly, "That's all I ever really wanted." From that moment on, their life became a quiet act of building, one day at a time. Maye began offering home visits as a nutritionist, helping people plan healthier meals, teaching families how to nourish with care. Her clients quickly grew to admire her not just for her knowledge, but for her kindness. Errol took freelance engineering jobs, often with little pay, but great responsibility. He fixed things, advised on electrical systems, designed better layouts for small businesses. He wasn't climbing a corporate ladder. He was laying bricks for something more meaningful. They made do with what they had. A second-hand couch, a dented refrigerator, hand-sewn curtains. But their little home was full of laughter, candlelight, and the scent of fresh herbs Maye kept in small pots by the window. On Sunday afternoons, they took long walks together. Sometimes they'd talk about their dreams, a house with a porch, a garden, maybe a child. Other times they said nothing at all, just walked, hand in hand, like two trees growing toward the same sky. One rainy evening, the power went out. Errol, without a word, rigged together a little lighting system using batteries, wires, and old flashlight bulbs. As Maye watched the soft glow return to the room, she smiled and said, "I think I married an inventor." He kissed her forehead. "I married the reason I invent." Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And every small challenge they faced together became another brick in the foundation of something quietly extraordinary. They didn't talk much about the family Errol had lost. It still hurt, not because he missed the money, but because he had once hoped to be seen, truly seen, by the people who raised him. But in Maye's presence, that old ache softened. At night, as they lay under a patched blanket, she would take his hand and whisper, "I'm glad we're here." And he'd whisper back, "Me too," because sometimes the most beautiful lives are not built from everything that was given, but from everything two people chose to keep holding on to. The years that followed weren't fast or glamorous, but they were good. Maye and Errol continued building their life with quiet patience and steady hands, like two gardeners tending a single growing tree. Their youth wasn't filled with extravagant travels or celebrations. It was filled with little choices, shared burdens, and victories so small only they could see their beauty. The modest house they rented started to reflect their souls. Maye, with her gentle eye for comfort, filled the rooms with warmth. Hand-sewn pillow covers, vases of fresh lavender, and curtains made from fabric remnants bought at discount. Errol, on weekends, repaired old furniture and fixed leaky faucets with the same precision he once gave to classroom equations. Their bond was built in silence as much as in words. Every morning, she made his coffee exactly the way he liked it. Every night, he left the porch light on, knowing she was afraid of the dark. It was a language without sentences, just gestures, repeated with love, until they became part of who they were. May continued seeing clients in their homes. She brought more than just dietary plans. She brought kindness, dignity, and a listening ear. Many of her patients kept photos of her in their kitchens, a reminder not just of better eating, but of hope. Errol's reputation spread slowly through word of mouth. He never advertised, never pushed. But one business owner would speak well of him to another. He began helping small stores with electrical layouts, repairing machinery for community workshops, suggesting improvements that saved money and time. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't own a desk. But his name was spoken with respect. They still struggled. Rent was always just manageable. Unexpected expenses hit hard, but they had figured out how to survive without bitterness. On cold evenings, they wrapped themselves in one blanket. On warm mornings, they had breakfast on the steps, sharing toast and watching the street wake up. Sometimes they dreamed aloud. A small piece of land, a house they could call their own, maybe a garden, maybe a child. They didn't rush those thoughts. They simply let them live in the quiet corners of their hearts, like seeds waiting for the right season. One Sunday, as the sun set in long golden streaks, May stood at the kitchen window, drying her hands. Errol was on the floor beside the heater, adjusting a loose wire. She looked at him, his slightly wrinkled shirt, the grease on his hands, the way he hummed softly while working, and thought, this is what love looks like. Not fireworks, not diamonds, just this. They kept a small wooden box under their bed where they stored letters, dried flowers, old receipts from their first grocery runs, and notes they had written to each other when words were too hard to say out loud. It was their treasure chest. Not for display, just for remembering. One day, during a rare visit to a local museum, May stopped in front of a painting of two hands clasped across a kitchen table. She stared at it for a long time. When Errol asked what she was thinking, she answered, "That's us. Not the hands in the painting, but the space between them." That trust. He smiled. He didn't need more. Their evenings were simple. A book read aloud, a shared bath, a quiet prayer. Sometimes they fell asleep holding hands. Other times, just knowing the other was there was enough. The world around them moved faster. Friends got promoted. Relatives moved abroad. Television screens filled with stories of success and urgency. But inside their home, the pace remained calm. They weren't falling behind. They were building something different. Their love matured like slow-cooked bread, not quick, but rich and full. The kind that nourishes deeply. Then, one bright Saturday morning, everything shifted. May had been waking up with nausea. At first, she thought it was exhaustion. Too many house visits. Not enough rest. But the feeling didn't pass. She mentioned it casually while making breakfast, not expecting much. Errol, ever attentive, paused mid-sentence. He looked at her for a long moment. "When was your last cycle?" She blinked, thought, counted. Her heart skipped. The next day, she bought a small test, more out of disbelief than certainty. She didn't say anything, just waited. And when the second line appeared, her hands trembled. She waited until dusk. The living room was bathed in warm light when she finally told him. He was repairing a lamp, sitting cross-legged on the rug. "Errol." He turned. She held up the test. Her lips trembled, but she smiled. He didn't speak, just stood up, walked to her, and wrapped her in his arms. Held her as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them, and a heartbeat they had not yet heard. "We're having a baby, Errol." He closed his eyes and breathed her in. Then everything we've built was for this. The day Elon was born, the sun rose slowly, as if making room for something precious. It had rained the night before, and the air smelled of wet leaves and warm bread. May lay quietly in the hospital bed, her blonde hair damp with effort, her hands resting gently over a small bundle swaddled in pale blue. Errol sat beside her, eyes full of wonder. He had held blueprints and tools all his life, but nothing had prepared him for the design of that tiny face. Elon's eyes barely opened, but when they did, for just a flicker, it felt like the world had rearranged itself. "He's here, May." She nodded, her voice soft. "I think he already knows us." Bringing a child into the world changed everything and nothing. Their routine became messier, their sleep thinner. But the heartbeat of their home remained the same: quiet love, daily care, and a deep sense of togetherness. May took a short pause from her work, dedicating her full attention to the little boy, who now filled the corners of the house with new sounds: soft coos, sudden cries, and the occasional delighted giggle. Errol worked longer hours, but always came home in time to hold his son close, rocking him gently near the window while whispering things about stars and engines and dreams yet to be named. As Elon grew, so did their world. When he turned 3, he began asking questions, not just about what things were, but why they worked the way they did. He would take apart toy cars, line up pebbles by size and color, and spend long minutes staring at the ceiling, as if imagining something far beyond. "He's not like the others, Errol," May whispered one evening, brushing Elon's hair as he dozed off. "No, he's like the sky on a clear day, too wide to explain, too beautiful to ignore." 2 years later, their second son was born, Kimball, a round-cheeked baby with a laugh like wind chimes. He brought a softness into the house, balancing Elon's quiet intensity with warmth and lightness. The two boys shared a room, growing side by side, inventing games and dreaming up impossible machines made of blocks and string. Tosca, their third and final child, arrived soon after. May had not planned for a third, but when she held the girl in her arms, with her wide eyes and quiet strength, it felt as if a missing page in their story had finally been written. Life began to settle into a fuller rhythm. The house, though still modest, now echoed with footsteps, bedtime stories, and the scent of family dinners shared over simple wooden plates. May returned to work gradually, with Errol supporting her every step of the way. They took turns with school pickups, doctor visits, and the small but important rituals that hold a family together. Their children grew curious, bright, and kind. May taught them to speak gently. Errol taught them to look closely. They raised thinkers and feelers and let each of them find their own light. Though they lived simply, joy visited often. On warm afternoons, the whole family would walk to the nearby park. Elon would bring paper and pens, drawing designs even as the others played. Kimball collected leaves and built imaginary farms. Tosca held her mother's hand and asked questions that made everyone smile. And through it all, May and Errol remained the steady center. They didn't go on vacations, didn't buy expensive toys. But every night they told stories. Every morning they made breakfast together. And every time one of the children cried, they were there, not just with answers, but with presence. There were difficult seasons, of course. Illnesses that passed, jobs that fell through, bills that came at the wrong time. But their unity was never in doubt. Even when they had to sell the old car and walk long distances, even when groceries had to be stretched, they never fought, they adjusted. With grace. And slowly, all the seeds they had planted in love, in patience, in faith, began to bloom. By the time Elon turned 12, their lives had grown far beyond what they had imagined as newlyweds in that borrowed garden. They were no longer just surviving. They were shaping something lasting. Their 3 children, though still young, showed signs of deep creativity, strength, and wonder. On quiet nights, May and Errol sat on the front steps once more, just as they had years before. The children were asleep and the house was still. The stars above them didn't shine any brighter than they had at the beginning, but now they meant more. "Do you remember what you said on our wedding night?" May asked. "That all I ever really wanted was us." She smiled. "You got it." He reached for her hand. "I got more than I ever knew was possible." And just like that, they sat in the silence, a silence filled with gratitude, memory, and the sound of something quietly beautiful unfolding. As the children grew into teenagers, it became clear that their talents were not ordinary, and neither were their dreams. Elon was already tinkering with computers, programming, and building strange devices out of old appliances. Kimball had a natural sense for leadership and warmth, often organizing school events or helping neighbors with small chores. Tosca developed a quiet grace, a deep reader with a sharp mind for stories and a heart full of empathy. Maye and Errol watched them with wonder, not because they were perfect, but because each child carried a spark that reminded them of the very love that brought them into the world. They weren't raising children anymore. They were raising souls. It was around this time that the family began to consider a move. Life in South Africa had changed. The political climate was shifting. Opportunities were becoming harder to come by. Elon, now a young man with eyes full of stars and notebooks filled with ideas, began speaking of going abroad, to study, to build, to dream bigger. At first, Maye hesitated. She had spent her whole life building a sense of home from scratch, and the idea of leaving it behind was like being asked to tear a page from a diary she hadn't finished writing. But one evening, while sorting old photographs with Errol, she came across an image of herself as a young woman, smiling on the steps of her college, eyes full of courage. "I think we're being called again, Errol. Not just Elon. All of us." He understood without needing an explanation. Sometimes the heart simply knows when it's time to begin again. They moved to North America in stages. Elon was the first to leave, attending school in Canada before eventually making his way to the United States. Then came Kimball, who followed with his own ambitions. Tosca, still in high school, remained close to Maye and Errol a while longer. Maye restarted her career once more, a new city, new clients, new routines. But her presence never changed. She became a figure of quiet strength in every room she entered. People trusted her, not just with their health, but with their stories. She gave more than advice. She gave care. Errol, though more reserved, found ways to contribute. He took up small consulting work, repaired things for neighbors, and volunteered at local schools teaching basic engineering principles. He didn't seek recognition. He simply stayed useful. Through the decades, their bond remained their anchor. They attended graduations, celebrated birthdays, and stood proud as their children each found their path. Elon, in particular, became something of a mystery to the world, ambitious, visionary, unstoppable. But to them, he remained their son, the boy who once asked what held stars in place. As their children built their futures, Maye and Errol quietly tended to the present. They adopted new habits, long walks after dinner, quiet afternoons reading aloud to each other, frequent video calls with the kids. They didn't chase grand things. They chose to stay close, to stay grateful. Then, in the winter of 2020, something shifted. Maye began to feel more tired than usual. At first, she attributed it to age. Then came the persistent ache in her side. The doctor was kind, the tests were thorough, and the answer came gently, but clearly, something was wrong. Something serious. She waited a few days before telling Errol. Not out of fear, but out of love. She wanted to find the right words, the right stillness. They sat together in the kitchen, the same way they always had, sharing tea in silence. "It's not something they can fix, Errol." He didn't speak. He just reached for her hand. He had held that hand through joy, through loss, through labor pains and airport goodbyes. He held it now just as tightly. They told the children together. Each took it indifferently. Tears, silence, long hugs. Elon, who had always spoken so easily of the future, became quiet. But when he looked into his mother's eyes, he found there was still so much present left to hold. Maye didn't crumble. She softened. She made peace with the unknown the same way she had embraced every new beginning, with grace. She chose to spend her remaining time at home, surrounded by the life she had built from love. Errol became her constant companion, preparing her meals, reading to her, brushing her hair. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They just sat in the light of the window, fingers gently entwined, remembering a life lived fully, not perfectly, but together. And though the end was near, the house remained full of stories, of laughter, of visitors. Even on hard days, there was music. Tosca played softly at the piano. Kimball cooked warm meals. Elon brought flowers and held his mother's hand for long stretches, saying little, but meaning everything. The days grew softer. The sun filtered through the curtains like a gentle blessing each morning. Birds still sang at the window. The world in all its vastness seemed to pause just a little for May. Her illness, though undeniable, never defined her. She refused to be reduced to a diagnosis. Instead, she continued being who she had always been, calm, graceful, present. Each breath she took was a choice to remain near those she loved for as long as she could. Errol was with her for every hour. He combed her hair with hands that had once fixed engines, now trembling with care. He recited poems she had loved in college, even the ones he teased her for. When she slept, he stayed by her side. When she woke, he smiled as if no time had passed. One afternoon, as the light bathed the room in a warm, amber hue, she looked at him for a long while. "You were the greatest adventure of my life," she said, voice barely louder than a whisper. He nodded, wiping away a tear with the back of his hand. "And you were my home." Elon arrived that same evening. His presence filled the room, though he said almost nothing at first. He simply sat beside his mother's bed and held her hand, the way she once held his during storms and sleepless nights. The man the world saw as unstoppable now seemed like a boy again, gentle, quiet, and full of love. They talked, not about rockets or deadlines, but about childhood memories. A broken chair he once tried to fix, the time he fell asleep reading under the kitchen table, how she would hum softly while brushing his hair. "I don't think I ever said thank you properly, Mom," he finally murmured. "Oh, Elon, you've said it with your whole life." Tosca and Kimball joined them the next day. The house was full, but not of fear, of reverence. They cooked, sang, and read stories aloud. May's favorite flowers were everywhere. Her room smelled of lavender and soft linen. The walls held framed photos, the children as babies, Maye and Errol on their wedding day, quiet holidays, and sunlit gardens. On her final morning, May asked to be taken to the veranda. Wrapped in a light shawl, she sat between her two great loves, her husband and the sky. The air was still, the trees rustling just enough to remind them of life. She took Errol's hand and looked out at the horizon. "We did good, didn't we?" He leaned toward her. "We did everything." She turned to Elon, who sat quietly beside her. "Take care of your heart, my son. The world will always ask for your mind, but take care of your heart." He nodded, eyes shining. As the afternoon turned to evening, May closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, her face at peace. There were no machines, no beeping monitors. Just the sound of birds, the scent of roses, and the feeling of a family wrapped in love. When the moment came, it was gentle, as if the breeze itself had carried her away, grateful to have touched such a soul. Errol remained still, holding her hand until it grew cool in his. He kissed her forehead, not in goodbye, but in thanks. Later that night, Elon sat alone in the garden, looking up at the stars. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. His mother had left him full of memory, of purpose, of love. She had taught him that life wasn't about achieving everything. It was about loving well, and that's exactly what she did. If this story touched your heart, take a moment and share a memory in the comments, something your mother or someone you loved once told you that stayed with you forever. I read each one with care.